Hi, my name's Paul Grogan and welcome to episode 61 of the Gaming Rules podcast, where I normally talk about the games that I've been playing and what I've been up to. But in this episode, things are going to go a little bit differently. I'm interviewing Mark from Sorastro's Painting about painting miniatures. Mark has his own YouTube channel, Sorastro's Painting. I've got to know him a little bit over the last year, and I thought it would be, well, this was originally going to be one of those small 10-minute pod blasts, but in the end we got chatting so much that I've decided to turn this into a full podcast. So, a quick shout out, thank you to all of my Patreon supporters for making this podcast possible. If you do enjoy my content, these podcasts, or any of the other stuff that I produce, then please, if you're interested in supporting me, check out my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/gaming rules. And also thanks to GamesLaw, the UK's largest specialist games retailer, at gameslaw.com for sponsoring this podcast. So anyway, without further ado, let's get on with the show. So, welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, first thing, for those people who are listening to this podcast who don't know what Sorastro's Painting is, just give us a brief overview of what it is.
It is a YouTube channel in which I produce tutorials which teach people how to paint miniatures, mostly from popular board games.
So it does have a board game focus rather than a wargaming focus, for example?
Generally, yes.
How long's the channel been running?
The channel's been going since, well, I produced my very first video in December 2013, but it didn't really start in earnest until the start of the Star Wars Imperial Assault series, which began in December 2014. So, about 4 years.
And this is a full-time thing for you now, isn't it?
It is now, yes, and it has been for nearly the last 2 years.
Right, okay. And what were you doing before this? As a side job, or as the main job?
Before doing this full-time, I was head of music at quite a large secondary school.
Right.
And I did that for about 11 years.
Okay. So the skills that you learnt during that, obviously teaching people things, being able to impart information, but also did you learn a bit about recording techniques, microphones and things?
To an extent, yes. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. The skills that I put into my videos really come from a whole range of hobbies and past work life experiences. And being in the classroom for 10 or 11 years, I think has prepared me well to be able to stand up in front of 30 teenagers and hold their attention for an hour is quite a skill.
Yes.
And you do learn to try to be as concise as you can be in your delivery, whilst also keeping the content meaningful and accessible. So yeah, it's certainly helped. Yeah,
I mean, with me creating my rules videos as well, because we're fellow instructional people. I'm teaching people how to play board games through videos. You're teaching people how to paint. Obviously, that's very, very different from teaching somebody in person. But, you know, there are certain skills that are transferable. I know I always prefer teaching in person because you're watching the faces. You're looking to see whether they actually understood what you've just said. And if they clearly didn't understand it, then you can say it again, but you know, in a slightly different way. Whereas in the video, if I say something and they don't understand it, they just have to press pause and rewind. I'm not there to,
yeah,
to explain it again.
No, that's very true. It is a slightly more detached way of teaching, I suppose. It takes some of the pressure off, though, because when you are in a live situation, and if you're in a classroom with 30 kids,
yes,
it's a very different thing. It's a very different dynamic. It comes with its own stresses. So it is quite nice to be able to deliver the content in a more measured, controlled way. And of course, I'm always on hand to answer any questions that people have in the comment sections, and I'm quite thorough in how I help and respond to people after the fact, as it were.
Yeah, which is good. So, before we go any further, just tell us a little bit about you yourself.
Well, my name's Mark. I am 43. I live in Brighton, which is on the south coast of the UK.
Where it's always sunny. Maybe not today.
Not quite, but yeah. And I've been living here, I don't know, 14, 15 years maybe. Prior to that, I lived in Singapore, where I did some teaching, piano teaching and music theory teaching for around 4 to 5 years. I am living with my wife and I have 2 beautiful children. My daughter's 10 years old and my son is 5.
And are they getting into music in any way?
Yes. They don't have much of a choice in that, to be fair. My wife also teaches from home, and she's a piano teacher.
Ah, right. Is that how you met?
Yes, that's right. So when I went to university, that's where we met. She's actually from Asia, and it was interesting when I got to university, I was feeling pretty good about my skills on the piano. And then I met all these amazing Asian students who had come over to do some of their studies at the same university. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they had such a dedicated approach to the craft and practicing of the instrument. So I immediately kind of immersed myself in their way of doing things. And I think it's always good if you can compare yourself to other people in a healthy way, like that, by just surrounding yourself with people that you admire, and you can then learn from them and improve in whatever endeavour it is. Well, I've forgotten what the original question was now.
Well, yeah, just a little bit about you. So that turned into you actually leaving the country and going to Singapore to teach piano for a number of years.
Yes, that's right. So we met at university. I've had to spend 2 more years completing my degree. And then I flew out there, which is where I spent 4 or 5 years teaching.
Yep.
And that's where I discovered that I enjoyed teaching.
Right.
It's hard to know when you're really going to enjoy a vocation or not without actually giving it a go. And as well as enjoying the subject, music, I just found I really enjoyed working with young people.
Right.
And there's an innate pleasure in imparting knowledge and understanding and helping someone.
Yeah. And then you came back to the UK and carried on the teaching here.
That's right. I had to do a teacher training course for 1 year.
Yep.
And then was thrown into the classroom and had an enjoyable and challenging 11 years teaching.
Right. And what age groups were you mainly teaching?
They were 11 to 16.
Right, the difficult years.
I think kids can get a bit of a bad rep, I think, in the media. And I taught some really amazing kids over those 11 years. And I've got lots of wonderful memories that I'll always keep. I did find towards the last few years of my teaching, the amount of bureaucracy was starting to sort of crush my soul a bit.
Right.
And yet at the same time, I was producing videos that people really responded well to.
Yeah.
And the two worlds sort of became very disparate, and the amount of effort you put into your work yielded very different measures of reward.
Okay.
She put it like that. So as I was getting more and more disparaged in my teaching practice, I was getting more and more encouragement from their videos. So it led to a point where I was actually heading towards earning as much through creating video content as I was as a teacher. Mm-hmm. So when it reached that tipping point, it was really a no-brainer. I just left the profession and have been enjoying life creating videos full-time since. Yeah.
I mean, we're going to have a good chat next time we meet up, because it's very, very similar to my background. So it's now a full-time thing for you, and you have a Patreon campaign, which is pretty successful, but you also take on commissioned work from some big publishers, like Fantasy Flight Games, for example.
Yes, that's true. I'd never heard of Patreon, actually, until one of my viewers mentioned it about 3 years ago.
Yep.
Suggested, why don't you start Patreon? I'd happily throw you a few dollars. Mm-hmm. So I looked into it, and it seemed like a very simple thing to set up. And I could see that the uptake was quite healthy, even from quite an early stage. And those early patrons were also really helpful in giving me input as to how I might structure the milestones and tiers of pledges and so on. And it's proven to be a very reliable source of income.
Yeah.
It's a very sort of, it's quite a fixed percentage of my viewership on YouTube that choose to become paying patrons.
Yeah.
Which made it quite easy for me early on to sort of forecast the way things were going.
That's good.
Yeah, it is really good. And I love the kind of direct relationship that Patreon allows as a platform. It's simply myself and my viewers.
Yes.
And if I produce rubbish, they're free to walk. If I carry on producing stuff they enjoy, they'll stick around.
They'll stick around.
And I love that dynamic.
Yeah.
You're right, though. I get quite a lot of offers for producing videos on commission.
Yep.
Most of which I turn down, or I explain that most of my content is crowdfunded.
Yes.
Therefore, I don't need to be paid to produce a video for you for this particular game. In certain circumstances, I'll say, that looks great, I'm really excited about that, I'll be happy to do it. And as you mentioned, at the moment, I'm producing videos for the Star Wars Legion game on that basis. And as that's an ongoing thing, that's the only commissioned work I'm prepared to take on at this time.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to maintain a healthy balance between commissioned stuff with the crowdfunded content.
Yeah.
And that's actually the main reason that I have the episodic payment structure in Patreon, because it lets me cleanly separate those two types of work.
I mean, as a Patreon supporter of yours, I really appreciate that balance between the two things, and the way that you are completely honest about it. I remember when you took on the work from Fantasy Flight, the email was basically saying, look guys, you pay me to create content, but I'm now getting paid by Fantasy Flight to create content. And you kind of explain the struggle of like, well, I don't want to charge you for it because I'm already being paid for it. And I can completely and utterly understand that, because I walk exactly that same path. And I just appreciated that amount of honesty by saying to people, you know, up front, what was being commissioned and what's being created using the Patreon campaign. So yeah,
good.
Keep doing that.
Thank you.
So I mean, the way that I've tried to structure mine, because I launched my Patreon back in October last year, is that I've always been upfront about the stuff that I produce, content that is commissioned, and I have said a number of times that the Patreon supporters are not paying me to create the rules videos. It is there to create all of the other content which isn't commissioned. For example, this podcast. You know, nobody's paying me any money to spend my time and the editing that it's going to take and all of that lot. So the Patreon allows me to dedicate more time to doing cool stuff like this, which no publisher's going to pay me to do.
Absolutely.
But going back to what you were saying earlier on, the best bit for me about my Patreon isn't the money that I get from it a month. It's suddenly there is a little gaming rules community, and we have a Slack channel, and we chat. And when I go to conventions now, and some of my Slack supporters meet up at those conventions and go, they've made friends with each other. And it's nice that there's this little smaller community within the bigger communities. Because of course, people can post on your YouTube and go, oh, great video. Next time, could you spend a bit more time talking about how you did this bit, whatever. And that's fine. But when you're getting it from people who are actually patrons of yours, I get a different feeling. I'm like, well, this guy's actually giving me some of his money a month. Yes. So I want to help him even more than I normally do.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's quite good. So anyway, moving on. One of the things that I want to just mention now is, because a few people, I think one of the questions that I was going to ask later on is kind of defunct, because a lot of people will think that you will do painting commissions for people, and you don't.
Right. No.
And how many times do you get asked to paint somebody's figures for them?
Perhaps not as often as you might think, actually.
Right, okay.
I don't know if that's just because people assume that my focus is producing videos and I'm doing well enough doing that I don't need to take on painting commissions. I'm not sure. But no, I do get asked from time to time, but it's not something that interests me particularly.
No.
I mean, I paint for the pleasure of painting, but I also paint because I intend to play a game with those miniatures.
Yes. Yes. Or just look at them.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I don't really see the attraction of painting for somebody else particularly. No. And neither is it really helping anyone, apart from, I suppose, that person in a way. Whereas you produce a video and you're reaching a large number of people who gain something from it.
Even if I was as good a painter as you and could paint as quick as you, I wouldn't want to do that either. Because once I've created something, I want to keep it and look at it. I don't personally, I mean, I'm not in that position, but if I was, I don't think I'd be able to do that either.
No, you're right. You want to keep it and look at it, but then you also want to move on to creating something new.
Yes.
I don't fancy the idea of repainting the same figure multiple times to sell on to somebody.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, right. Let's shoot over to the Board Game Geek Guild and get through some questions that people have sent in. So the first one is actually from Jerome Dryhouse, who, you might not know this, but he supports 2 people on Patreon.
I do know this,
right?
yes.
Me and you. So thank you very much, Jerome. So it makes sense that we ask his question first. And he wants to know, what was the first game that made you pick up a brush and start painting miniatures?
The first game? The first game that I painted would have been Warhammer and Warhammer 40k.
Right.
40k came out when I was around 12, and I painted Space Orcs for that. I've still got a few, actually.
Oh.
And I had quite a large undead fantasy army.
Yep.
I remember being quite into snot goblins for a while or 2.
Right.
But that's not the first time I painted, because even at a younger age, we used to paint airfixed dinosaurs and airplanes, that type of stuff, with a little enamel, pots of enamel paint. Yeah,
you're a little bit younger than me, but when I started painting when I was 9 or 10, acrylic paints were not out then. It was little Humbrol paints, and they were enamels, and it was you had to get thinners to clean your brush afterwards. It was like, oh my God, it was a nightmare.
Yeah. So quick answer: Warhammer and Warhammer 40k.
Right. Yes, because we didn't mention, but obviously you've been doing Sorastro's painting channel for 4 or 5 years now. But actually, you didn't suddenly start painting then and become an expert. You've actually been painting for quite a while.
Yes, I painted for several years as a child.
Yeah.
But stopped sort of in my, I don't know, mid to late teens maybe. And then it was around 10 years ago, I was wandering in the lanes in Brighton, and I walked past Games Workshop.
Yep.
And I peered in through the window at all the painted miniatures, and I just felt that childlike glee again. And so I walked in and left the shop £100 poorer with the Battle to Skull Pass box set under my arm and a whole bunch of paints and primers and so on.
Right.
And I sat down and began painting again, and I found that I actually enjoyed it more than I remember enjoying it as a child. I don't know if it's just because I have a little more patience as an adult, a bit more control and skill over what I'm doing. I just really, really enjoyed the creative process of bringing these little monsters and bits of plastic to life. Yeah,
it's funny what you said about walking past Games Workshop and fielding this childish. I'm 47, right? I still do that now. And I was doing it 30 years ago or whatever. And I remember the friends that I had at the time, and my parents were thinking, oh, he's going to grow out of this, right? And here we are. I'm nearly 50, and I feel exactly the same thing. Now, my painting is nowhere near up to that standard, but when I see well-painted miniatures, it gives me an urge to go and be creative myself and paint them myself. Yeah. And also to play games with those painted miniatures. Now, guaranteed, I don't generally play those types of games, but that doesn't stop me appreciating, you know, how good they look.
Yeah,
so cool. Right. So Jerome also wants to know, what is the one board game you'll refuse to play?
Monopoly.
Right. Because it's not a game.
It's one of those games. Yeah, it's one of those games that was kicking around as kids, and even then I hated it.
Right.
The random element, the fact that it's just about a ruthless greed as well.
It is. The subject of the game is like, do we really want to bring our kids up with, you get loads of money and then you buy out your opponents and the one with the most money wins? It's sending a bad message, I think, out there.
Yeah, there's no scope for cooperation in it at all. And I would sometimes want to play it and sort of say, oh, are you collecting this row? I'll let you have, you know, but then it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that, because there'll be someone in the group that just, you know, stomps over everybody. And
exactly.
It's no fun.
Right. Chris Stanton, a friend of mine from way back when, wants to know, what range of paints and tools do you like using?
Well, historically, I used mostly Citadel paints, because that's kind of what I grew up with. Also, my wife a few years ago bought me the Citadel Ultimate paint set. So, you know, there's a good reason right there for using Citadel paints.
Is that as awesome as it sounds?
It's awesome. It's a good set of paints, but it's also a very compact. It comes in a very compact box with little sliding drawers, which is perfect when you're working in a small room like I do.
Right.
But having said that, I do love exploring different paint ranges. Lately, you may have seen I'm using increasingly larger numbers of Vallejo paints, especially the model color range. I've begun dabbling with some scale 75 paints. The true metallics I particularly like, and the inks are quite nice. I've just begun trying out some Secret Weapon products. I really love the rust colors, for example. So I love trying new stuff out, and over the years, it's natural that you'll see that reflected within the videos. Although I am sensitive to the fact that the viewership for a particular series may be quite heavily invested in the paints that I initially used for that series. So I do try not to make sudden switches of larger numbers of colour, but you may see it happen gradually. I mean, I'm now using, for example, the Vallejo black and white colours because I prefer them to the Citadels. My Citadel whites have gone all lumpy and weird.
Interesting.
The Vallejo black is a bit more purer than the Citadel one, so there may be a subtle shift over time. And I'm also really anti-fanboy anything. So I don't like the idea of simply going all in on one specific range and sticking with it.
And as you say, the different ranges, different colours within different ranges might suit you better. I mean, I remember when I was getting back into painting 6 or 8 years ago now, after like a 20-year break, I thought, I'm not going to buy Citadel paints because they're really, really expensive. I'll buy cheaper ones that are just as good. And I made a point of saying I'm not going to buy the Games Workshop ones. And I bought a load of Vallejo ones. And some of them are great. And some of them are awful. And my Vallejo black is just awful. It's way too shiny. And I bought the matte one because I don't like gloss paint. And it's really, really glossy. And the problem is I was using that to mix with other, you're probably going to, you know, but you know, I was mixing that with other colours to darken it, and then it turns out that I was getting so frustrated by this, thinking, well, it must be me that's doing something wrong, and I found out that there was a batch of matte Vallejos that got mislabeled and as gloss or no gloss ones, and I'm like, oh, so for years all of my stuff has ended up looking shiny because the matte black that I bought was actually gloss.
Oh dear.
And I'm like,
oh dear.
And I bought a couple of other Vallejo ones that are just unusable. Either something went wrong with the mixture or whatever. But anyway, yes, you very. I mean, it was funny when I first watched one of your videos. You know, when you watch cookery programs or you read recipes in fancy magazines and they list all of these ingredients that you've never heard of that you've got to go to Waitrose to buy. That was the first thing that I thought of when I started watching your videos because I'd been out of painting for so long. And last time I was painting with Citadel miniatures, there were like 30 different colours. And you was like, right, so for this one, I've used this particular paint. And I'm like, what? And then I looked on the Citadel page and I was like, oh my God, things have moved on a bit. There's like 150 different colours now. They now do, there's the base. They do different colours for different things, don't they?
Yeah, they have a kind of a system. And I don't work within those confines, really. I just, if I want to use that colour for this purpose, I will use it for that purpose. But yeah, generally they have base colours which are supposed to be kind of higher pigmented. And the layer paints are supposed to be a little more translucent, so good for building up layers and so on. But I don't particularly stick to the system.
Yeah, as you say, it's liquid in a pot. You can do what you want with it. But you know, I remember watching one of their videos on one of their technical paints, and they basically say, right, these technical paints, these are for a specific purpose, and it was their blood paint, and I think it was an official Games Workshop on how to actually apply this particular one to get splatters of blood. And I thought, this is actually really cool that they have made a paint specifically for this purpose. So yeah,
I do like the technical paints. But it is nice to think outside the box sometimes. The Valhalla Blizzard Snow one's really good, for example, as snow, but also makes really nice kind of sea foam as well.
Oh, okay. Right. Chris also wants to know, what techniques do you wish you'd learned earlier? And I want to see these photos of these space orcs that you painted when you were 12.
Gladly, I'll dig them out for you. That's a slightly odd question because it sort of implies an element of regret.
Okay.
But I think we're all on our own painting journeys.
Yeah.
And the important thing is not to be afraid to try new techniques or approaches, and to embrace and enjoy new discoveries or ways of working. But that doesn't necessarily mean looking back critically at past work and regretting not having learnt that thing sooner.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody starts painting with a full set of skills.
No. But if you were to start painting now, for example, there's the base colour, and then you can do a wash or an ink, and then you can dry brush and you can highlight. When I started painting, I'd never heard of any of those things. So something like dry brushing or washing or dipping, which some people do, they are techniques I wish I'd have known a long, long time ago. But I don't even know if the paints were around. You know, inks and washes kind of weren't really around then.
No, it's true. So yeah, a tricky one to answer, really. I mean, I've enjoyed making each little breakthrough in my own painting each time I do it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I ever then look back and go, oh, damn, I wish I'd done that
sooner.
Way back when.
Yeah.
Yeah, because even during that time when I wasn't doing whatever that thing was, I was still developing and learning and improving. I don't know. Generally, I don't look back. I just tend to look forwards mostly.
And have you got, speaking of techniques like dry brushing and stuff like that, have you got any techniques that you've effectively created yourself?
That's an interesting question. There's perhaps the wash and sock method.
Okay.
Which I pioneered with the first ATST that I did for Imperial Assault.
Right.
Which just involves throwing on the Nuln Oil wash and then grabbing a sock or something similar and just wiping it off the raised surfaces.
Right.
So it doesn't over darken the raised elements, but it gets quite a nice dirty weathered look and some nice streaks as well.
Right. But it has to be a sock.
It doesn't have to be.
But it's the wash and sock, so...
But wash and sock sounds good, so...
Yes, it does.
Yeah. I mean, it may be... Other people may have done it already, I don't know, but I'd sometimes just do stuff and I don't necessarily know if it's been done before or not.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to another friend of mine, Chewy. So he says, there's somebody who... So Chewy is somebody who commissions other board game miniatures people to paint the miniatures for his games, because he doesn't have time himself. And this is the one I was referring to, is Chewy's sort of asking, how do you know what to price and things like that? But as you say, you don't do commissions.
No, so it'd be tricky to answer, really, and I wouldn't know how to. I mean, if I had to create a price for myself painting something for someone else, I would have to simply sit down, estimate the number of hours it would take, and charge whatever.
Charge accordingly.
I would have to charge whatever I would be earning were I producing a video in that time instead of painting miniatures.
Yes. When I look at the miniatures that some people who paint miniatures are providing and how much they charge per miniature, I'm like, I mean, I'm one of the world's slowest painters. And I look at that and I'm like, literally, it would take me about 20 hours to paint that miniature. And they've probably done it in 1 or 2. Yeah. And I think, so for me, commissioning miniatures to get them painted, that's not going to be a career. So for all of you miniature painters out there who commission, who take payment for painting miniatures, don't worry. You won't find any threat from me at all. I don't know. I mean, I like the painting process, so I'm not in a rush. But when I'm painting 20 archers, I kind of am in a rush because I'm a bit bored. I'm painting 20 miniatures all exactly the same. And then I'll get to the end of the first night, we'll have watched 3 episodes of Walking Dead, and I would have painted the boots on 10 of them in 3 hours. And I'm like, why am I so slow? And it's because I don't like making mistakes. I'm too careful.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Victoria wants to know, what piece of work are you most proud of, and which one did you enjoy the most if they are not the same? Ooh.
I think I'm probably most proud of those occasions where I've taken a risk or tried something new.
Okay.
Like, I mean, when I say new, I mean new for me.
Yeah.
So wet blending the skin tones on the Ettins from Descent, for example.
Right.
Or when I first started making use of zenithal highlights, like for the Frost Giant from Blood Rage. Nelly the Barmaid, I was quite proud of her at the time as well.
Okay.
Because of the handling of the colours. I think from my recent work, there's probably two that stand out. One would be the Star Wars Legion Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I remember painting the first Darth Vader for Imperial Assault 3 years ago, and I was absolutely terrified.
Right.
I really felt out of my depth as a painter.
Okay.
There's also a psychological component with Vader. He just has that effect on me.
It's not real.
I know, but I think I grew up with it as a child, and there's something about, I don't know, it still has a presence there. But with the Legion Vader, I felt a lot more confident and fearless in my approach. I felt a lot more in command of what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And if I put the two side by side, it's a very nice affirmation of the progress I've made personally in the last 3 years.
Okay.
So definitely Darth Vader.
Yep.
And the other one would be the Prologue Survivors from Kingdom Death Monster. Now, I've had the game for two years or so, but I'd put off painting them because I just did not feel I had the abilities as a painter to do them justice.
Right, okay.
So in my mind, I had quite a dramatic vision of how I wanted them to look. And I just never felt I had what it took to realise that vision.
Right.
So I waited. And then eventually I thought, okay, I'm just about ready for this now. And I did have to dig deep. I did lots and lots of prep work. I tried lots of approaches and colour combinations. But again, it was a bit of a fearless approach. I stuck to the vision I wanted, and I didn't worry too much about what anyone else might think of it.
Okay.
Because it was quite a dramatic sort of the way that I lit the miniatures. But even now, I glance over and then they're sitting in the cabinet, and they do have such presence, and they're such beautiful sculptures, really stunning, beautiful sculptures. And there's something also about the theme behind them that kind of resonates with me.
Okay.
The sense of the fear and dread that they're facing, yet somehow they muster the courage to overcome this horror. They grab a piece of rock off the floor, and I think the opening line in that little monologue in the rule book is he takes a deep breath and roars into the darkness. There's something very poignant about that. And I think I somehow feel I managed to imbue that in the way I approached the miniatures.
Cool. And you're saying that the sculpt of those miniatures manages to capture that feeling as well?
Yes, very much so. They're almost like sort of Renaissance sculptures. The beauty of the form and also the quality of the plastic. So they were daunting to approach. Right. But I felt that I rose to the challenge adequately.
See, what's fascinating for me to sit here and listen to what you're saying. So I'm not saying this just because you're on the show, but I regard you as probably the best miniature painter that I know of. So if there are better people out there, I don't know of them.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't view myself as a professional painter as such.
Right. Okay.
I'm a professional video producer, and the videos are about painting. As a painter, I probably rate myself as good.
Right. Okay.
But not necessarily better than that.
Okay.
I mean, there are so many painters that I look up to and admire. Alfonso Giraldez, Ben Comets, and so on. Sergio Calvo. There are so many amazing painters in the world that I draw inspiration from.
Right. Okay. See, I'm not in those circles. Those names don't mean anything to me, and I think it's because I'm looking at your videos and I'm seeing what you're doing, and then I'm seeing the end result. Whereas I don't look at painted miniatures and go, "Oh yeah, that's a miniature by somebody else." Of course, if they started making videos on how to paint, then different story. So
sure.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just, so you look at miniatures from other people, and you can say, "I can't paint as good as that."
Well, no, it's not quite like that. I mean, those artists, firstly, tend to paint larger busts and so on.
Right.
And I look at their work the same way that I might look at works from the masters in an art gallery, for example. Yeah. So I don't couch it in terms of I'll never be able to do that. But I look at it and go, wow, look at the way he's used that colour there.
Right.
Or look at the texture of the brush strokes here. I want to be a bit more like that. and then you take a bit of that away with you, and you sit down, and a bit of it might come out in your own painting.
Right.
I actually had a masterclass with Alfonso Giraldes last year.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's partly where some of my new sort of fearlessness has come from, in the way that I will paint. Although I do have to be quite controlled in when I'm recording the videos, because it's got to be easy to replicate.
Yes.
And so on. But yeah, there's lots that I took away from his approach to painting, and it's not in the sense that, oh, I'll never be able to do that, but I love the way he's done that, and I want to go and try a bit of that in my own work.
Right. See, when I watch one of your videos, I'm making reference again back to the cookery reference that I made earlier on. There's no way that I can watch one of your videos and then go away and suddenly I'm painting as good as that. Nobody can. But if I just come away from that video learning one thing, that's fine. You know, if I can just, oh, I like the way that he highlighted the chainmail and stuff like that. Right, that's the bit that sits in with me. And then gradually, the more of your videos that I watch, the more little tiny bits I pick up here and there, and then just experiment and try them myself and go, ah, right, great. And that, I'll learn from that.
That's it.
Yeah, whereas my rules videos, I want you to sit there and listen to every single word, because you've got to learn the entirety of the game. It's a completely different, you know, way of learning. And
yeah, sure.
So anyway, moving on to the questions. Rob Stevenson,
Okay.
What's your third favourite colour?
Does that imply he knows what my first two favourite colours are?
No, if you want to say what your first and second are, then feel free. But
I don't have. I mean, obviously, I have particular paints I'll reach for more often than others. I'm quite fond of dark sea blue, for example, and stuff like that. But no, I don't have a written list of favourite colours.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the colours that you would use on the miniature, like if you decided to paint, you know, Darth Vader in pink, then that might not work. So you're bound sometimes by the theme and the setting and everything else.
Well, yeah, that's true. And the fact that most of what I paint is really recreative rather than creative, in as far as I'm trying to recreate the look either of a character from, say, Star Wars, or the character art from a game like Zombicide Black Plague.
Right.
So it's not often that I'm sort of forced to sit down and come up with my own colour schemes as such.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, something's just popped into my head. Something I wish I would have learned earlier on is you can apply more than one coat of paint to something. So it sounds silly, I know, but I'd be painting like the flesh on the arms or something, and I'd want to paint the flesh on the arms. And then I'd end up with it clumping. And it just especially when I'm doing whites or yellows or anything like that, and it just doesn't look right. And then after watching various videos, probably including yours, it was like, no, thin the paint out and paint one coat and then another one and then maybe another one. And all of a sudden you've now got the colour you wanted, but you haven't got clumps of paint.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I'd wish I learned that earlier on. Right, Matt from Creaking Shelves wants to know that what miniatures have you had the most fun painting recently?
Oh, let's see. I really enjoyed painting Vinto from Imperial Assault. Lovely vibrant skin tone. I liked playing around with the pauldrons. I've had a lot of fun with the vehicles in particular from Legion.
Right.
So the ATST, I've just finished the airspeeders. They were a lot of fun as well. And as to the question, why did I enjoy them? That's tricky. I always enjoy a bit of weathering.
Right.
And although I was quite restrained with my ATST, I've gone over the top with the airspeeder, so that's always fun. Rust effects, blaster marks, and so on.
Bits of mud and stuff like that.
Yeah. I've also really enjoyed painting the Gloomhaven minis, actually.
Right.
Although I've only done 2 so far.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it's not to say I don't think the miniatures are particularly amazing, but it's almost not important. In a way, the less good quality the miniature, the more you can add to it by painting it well.
Right, okay.
But I also like the feeling of each character having a distinct overall colour.
Yeah.
Or like an aura. So I've been really restricting the numbers of colours I've been using for each one to help kind of realise that. So they've been quite fun to work on too.
You've done the Brute and the Spellweaver, haven't you?
Yes, that's correct.
I remember seeing the pictures of them. So yeah, the Brute is kind of all browny,
Yeah.
The Spellweaver would be purpley.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Matt also wants to know, which miniatures have you found the most challenging or frustrating to paint recently?
Challenging would be the Kingdom Death Monster.
Right.
Prologue Survivors, definitely.
Yeah.
For reasons we've sort of gone over. Frustrating?
Frustrating is a difficult one. Because if you did a video of a miniature that you found frustrating to paint, that wouldn't make for a good video.
No, it wouldn't.
With you throwing it in the bin.
No, it's true. I did paint the goblins from Descent for a PDF guide.
Okay.
A while ago, and I don't know. Frustrating is not really the word. They just didn't really enjoy it.
Right.
I think the quality of the sculpts and the lack of character. It was just a bit of a. It was a job rather than something I did, purely for pleasure. But I'm glad I did them because they form part of the set, which overall looks good. But yeah.
And especially when you just talked for the last 20 minutes about the fact that some of the sculpts are really good and some of them give a presence and a feeling that when you get a sculpt which is, well, it's just a goblin, there's nothing special about it. I can see how that, you're like, oh, okay, I'll just paint it then. Yeah. So, right, moving back to board gaming.
Okay.
Because it's how we know each other. What board gaming do you actually do yourself? Would you class yourself as a board gamer?
Yes, although I don't play nearly as much as I might like. But yeah, I've got mountains of sort of board games piled up in the bedroom and elsewhere. Many of which I've either not opened or only had a chance to play once. I'm not yet revisited, so I'm one of those people who will buy them at a faster rate than I can actually play them. Yep,
that's like most people these days.
but yeah, in my bedroom, in one corner, I have quite a large table, which is the only place in the house that I can actually leave a game out for any extended period, and there's usually something there. At the moment, it's the Arkham Horror card game, which I'm playing with my daughter.
Yep.
Last week, it looked like a chunk of Endor, because I was playing some Star Wars Legion, again, with my daughter. It's also where I shoot all the scenic shots with the miniatures and the trees, etc. What else have I played lately? I've played the Fallout board game, briefly. Robinson Crusoe, Adventures on a Cursed Island. It's one of my favourites.
The new version?
Absolutely.
Yeah, with the good rule book.
With the immaculately written rule book. Thank you for that. I've had a quick dabble with the Imperial Assault app, but I think that's got to be next on my table to have a proper playthrough.
So this was it, because I remember when we were chatting at UK Games Expo last year, I think you were playing the Arkham Horror card game then. So it's great to see that you're still playing that now, because they are keeping it alive with obviously new packs all of the time.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, at the time, we had gotten through the first 4 scenarios of that first campaign. Yeah. And then we packed it away to play some other stuff. But luckily, I kept all the decks in individual bags. Yep. And then just last week, my daughter says, oh, can we play Arkham Horror again? So, yeah, got it all out, unpacked it all, and luckily everything was still in place, and we were able to just pick up where we left off. So it's great. Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing I was curious about are these miniatures games like Imperial Assault, Legion, and things like that. Is do you actually play them as a gamer? And obviously you do. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the basis upon which I choose to paint a game. It's because I want to play the thing with painted miniatures. Right. I love theme and I love aesthetics as well. So to sit down with a fully painted miniature-based game is the best way for me to enjoy that hobby. Yeah. I mean, the amount of games that are coming out these days, bling is a thing now in games. And there's a lot of games that if they'd have come out 10 years ago, it would have just been wooden counters or whatever. But now, especially with the advent of things like Kickstarter, we are getting more miniatures in games, which fits, what you are doing now is you've hit the sweet spot in, not that this was your business plan, is like, oh, I'll wait for the market to suddenly become full of everybody doing nice miniatures and then I'll launch my channel. It's been a coincidence kind of thing. No, but very much so. Yeah. We are getting lots and lots of games where people want to make their game look more attractive with either, blinged up components. We're no longer
we no longer, wooden cubes to represent wood is not good enough anymore. We want 3D sculptured little logs, things like that. And I have to admit, when you're playing a game that has these miniatures in it, if they're not painted, I'm like, okay, you know, and it doesn't make any difference at all to the game itself, but it adds to the experience.
Yeah.
If they just look gorgeous and they're really well painted. So. Yeah,
that's right. There are a lot of miniature-based games out there now, and it's, like you mentioned, it's probably a growing thing.
Yeah.
I think it's important that, I mean, when I started making videos, it was purely to satisfy a creative need.
Right.
You know, I'd just got my first DSLR that was capable of shooting video.
Yep.
And I happened to be painting the original Zombicide zombies.
Yep.
And I thought it'd be great to see what I could do with the camera and shoot a little video teaching people how to use Quickshade.
Yep.
A year later, I remember when Imperial Assault came out, and I actually drove directly from work into town to go to the board game shop and buy Imperial Assault. And I was so excited by it. Over that Christmas holiday was when I then sat down and made the first Stormtrooper video.
Yeah.
And again, it wasn't with any thoughts of becoming a big YouTuber or and certainly no thoughts of it ever being monetized in any kind of meaningful way.
Yeah.
It was purely to satisfy a creative need. I absolutely love all of the aspects of creating the videos.
Yeah.
From scripting the narration, the videography, photography, composing the music to enhance the theme. The video is just, it's my expression of my love of the theme of the game.
Yeah.
And the video itself is as much of a work of art to me as the miniature that I'm painting in the video.
Yeah.
And I think as long as I never let myself stray from that principle of picking stuff that I'm personally passionate about and want to see through, then I think that's the way forwards for me.
Yeah.
And it's also the reason why I've worked hard to try and limit the number of games that I cover and avoid the temptation of necessarily jumping on the latest kind of bandwagon or the new version of game X, for example, when I still haven't finished the base game of, say, Descent or something like that. So, yeah, there is a lot of new stuff out there.
Yeah.
But I do try to remain reasonably narrow and focused on a core set of games that I myself personally want to see finished painted so I can play them and enjoy them. Yeah. But also for the benefit of my viewers who are following me for a specific game. So ultimately, they'll have a full set of videos that they can then work through.
Exactly.
In their own time.
You know, if I was to go out and buy Imperial Assault or Legion, right? And then I go, oh, Mark's done a video on how to paint Darth Vader. Oh, and he's done a video on how to paint the ASTSD. But that's it. And I'm like, right, well, I've painted those two. What am I going to do with the rest of them? So the fact that you cover every miniature that's in the game, you know, then it's like, right, well, somebody could literally just... So I think that's good, that you focus on it rather than moving around. So anyway, what's new coming up soon that you're allowed to tell people about?
So coming up soon, I've just completed the T-47 Airspeeder for Star Wars Legion.
That's the rusty one, isn't it? You were mentioning earlier on.
Yep. So that will be coming out pretty soon. I am going to finish the 4th monster from Blood Rage very soon, which is the Sea Serpent. So that forms quite a nice little quadrilogy covering those 4 monsters.
Yep.
There'll be more Imperial Assault. It will be the next hero from the Jabba's Realm expansion. I've forgotten his name now.
Dave.
We'll call him Dave.
Call
Big
him
muscly
Dave.
one. I can see, I'm looking at him right now, but I've forgotten his name. I'm going to carry on chipping through the Gloomhaven miniatures.
Yep.
I've not yet decided who the next one will be. I'll probably put that to Patreon vote.
Yeah, put it to a vote, yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to tackling the White Lion from Kingdom Death Monster.
Right.
So that's also on the radar.
Yeah. Excellent. Sounds good. And you're going to UK Games Expo again this year?
Yes. I've not booked my tickets yet, but yes, I'm surely will be.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to arrange a meeting up there. There's a number of technical video filming related questions that I'd like to ask you personally. We won't ask them here because it's really technical details. But as a person who makes videos himself, there's a number of things that you do in your videos that I have no idea how you do them, and I just want to know. So yes, I'll pick your brains at UK Games Expo.
Absolutely.
But for now, thank you very much for coming on the show. As I say, this interview has been, predominantly about painting miniatures, and most people who listen to my podcast are board games people, and they probably wanted to hear about board games. But painting miniatures in board games is a lot bigger now than it was 5-10 years ago. And yeah, I hope it's been an interesting listen for my Patreon people and for other people listening to the podcast.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
No, it's been great. And just to remind people, Mark does have a Patreon campaign, but all of your stuff is on your YouTube channel, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. But it's Sorastro's painting, I guess. If people just search for that, they'll find it.
Yeah, they'll find it.
Everything's on your website as well, which is sorastro.com.
Correct.
And there'll be a link to your Patreon page on there as well.
Yes.
So, excellent. Right, well, thanks again, and I'll speak to you soon.
Pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
And there we are. That's the end of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed the discussion with Mark about painting miniatures. As Mark says, if you watch any of his videos and you've got any questions, then if you pop those into the YouTube comments, then he'll always try and answer them as best he can. So yeah, a very big thanks to Mark for giving up his time on a Sunday afternoon and going ahead with the interview. And thanks very much to everybody for listening. Again, thank you to all my Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible. And also to Games Law, the UK's largest specialist games retailer at gameslaw.com. Thank you also to Jason Shaw at audionautics.com for the music used in this podcast. And Gaming Rules is a member of Punchboard Media, where we all bring something to the table, and a proud supporter of the Board Game Trading and Chat UK Facebook group. Until next time, take care, and thanks for listening.